Hello, good evening. Welcome to the John Drew Backyard Theater. I'm Josh Gladstone. Thank you. It's pretty amazing, frankly, as simple as it is, that this little stage, this little 16 by 16 platform here at Guildhall has been created and allowed to exist in the midst of what we're all living through. It's no small testament to Sebastian Paczynski, our technical director, who has created a gorgeous, beautiful lighting in the place, and Rafael Alvarez, who's managed to make this place sound terrific, as small as we are here. Nice work, gentlemen. And Andrea Grover, our executive director, who literally went to war with the village of East Hampton and the powers that be, and came out with a victory. It was pretty amazing. So we have a couple of programs coming up. Before we get into tonight's, I want to just give you a little pitch about the Backyard Theater. If you haven't taken a look at the Guildhall website, we've got some interest. You people are people of letters, I can see through your masks. So we've got play readings that are really interesting. A piece called Tenderly by an Iranian playwright named Ida Ismaili, who is quarantined out here with her boyfriend. They both happen to be in the Columbia MFA program for writing and acting. And it's a great piece. And it's a happy accident that they're here. So I recommend that if you like this environment and you like beautiful language and want to support young artists, check out Tenderly, coming up next Thursday night, a week from today. And we also have a beautiful play directed by Austin Pendleton called Heisenberg, which a few tickets are still available for next Sunday night. And then later, if you're a music fan, G.E. Smith will be here with Leroy Bell, a night of blues and acoustic guitar. That's the 28th of August. So is Tahanish here in the audience? A woman named Tahanish? No? The poets have asked me, since Tahanish was going to come, but I guess got delayed in some traffic, to acknowledge something we haven't done before, but I think it's a great idea, thank you, to acknowledge that we are here on the lands of the ancient Shinnecock and Montaukett peoples, and we must honor and acknowledge that. And now I'm going to introduce our poets. Kathy Engel is a poet who has worked for 40 years at the nexus between social justice movements and art and imagination. Her books include Ruth's Skirts, Poems and Prose, We Begin Here, Poems for Palestine and Lebanon, co-edited with Kamal Bulata, and The Kitchen, with art by German Perez, and the chapbook Banish the Tentative. She's founder with a group of women in 1983 and first director of the international women's human rights group Madre, and co-founder, producer, consultant for numerous projects, campaigns, and organizations. She works as Associate Arts Professor in the Department of Art and Public Policy at the Tisch School of the Arts at NYU, and she lives here among us in Sagaponack. New York State Poet Laureate Alicia Ostreicher wrote this about Kathy's new book, The Lost Brother Alphabet. Quote, I found it hard not to straight out weep reading The Lost Brother Alphabet, both for the sorrow flowing through it and the beauty and buoyancy of its language and the gladness of how fully alive it is in every dancing phrase and every bit of tribute to tenderness and justice. Joining Kathy is Jill Bialosky, the author of 5 acclaimed collections of poetry. Most recently, Asylum, a personal, historical, natural inquiry in 103 lyric sections. 3 critically acclaimed novels, most recently The Prize, a New York Times best-selling memoir, History of a Suicide, My Sister's Unfinished Life, and Poetry Will Save Your Life, a memoir. Her poems and essays have appeared in Best American Poetry, The New Yorker, The Atlantic, Harper's Magazine, O, the Oprah Magazine, the Kenyon Review, Harvard Review, and the Paris Review, among others. She co-edited with Helen Shulman the anthology Wanting a Child. She is executive editor and vice president at W.W. Norton Company. Her work has been a finalist for the James Laughlin Prize, the Patterson Prize, and Books for a Better Life. In 2014, she was honored by the Poetry Society of America for her distinguished contribution to poetry. She lives in New York City. What are you doing here? Of Asylum, her newest volume, Publishers Weekly wrote, the elegiac 5th collection from Bialosky transcends genre, weaving tragedy, language, and perception in a poignant work of personal and public exploration. Embracing repetition and illusion, Bialosky confronts the memory of her sister, who died by suicide at 21, offering a view of a girl with, quote, blue eyes bright, with the burn of knowing and barely a fleck of gloom because she was young and brave. In addition to personal vignettes of loss, Bialosky extends her bereavement to mourn the lives lost to pandemic, racism. She cites Eric Garner's last words, and genocide. She relays sobering accounts of the Holocaust. Here, she explores language as an all-encompassing source of longing, consolation, redemption, and preservation. She addresses internment camps and how one's definition of asylum changes based on context. Quote, some went mad from desperation. One, we read, took his life. Asylum, in which the mind seeks to keep itself from torture. Bialosky assembles a collage of her alchemized projections and sobering disillusionments in a cohesive amalgamation of truth and spectacle. Quote, in the battlefield of time, regardless, like trees, we all eventually fall, end quote. Erudite and devastating, Bialosky's timely collection reverberates with a rare empathy and resilience. Please welcome to the stage the sister poets, Jill and Kathy. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jill, and thank you all for coming out. This is the first COVID reading I've experienced. I'm really happy to be reading with Kathy today. We've talked about wanting to do this for many years now, and I'm glad to have the opportunity. I'm going to read from my new book, Asylum. And as Josh said, it's a book-length, long inquiry, part poetry, some prose. And I created a sequence from the book called Breathe, a Natural Sequence. So I'm going to read the sequence. And I just wanted to just preface this by saying that what you will be hearing tonight, the sequence is made from my observations about the natural world from the porch of our, actually from the deck of our house that we've had in Bridgehampton for 22 years now, and my observations of how the natural world has evolved and changed over that time. And so we looked for patterns, for order to ward off chaos, for aberrations that might offer a hint, because we were seekers, because grief had transformed us. Trees breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide, releasing energy and water into the air. Some birth flowers of only one sex, and others both male and female flowers. The same way we bear fruit to those we bear and those who bear us. Even trees are in the presence of the divine, we were told. In some cultures, they are thought to have a consciousness, to feel happiness and pain. Some are twisted, some antithetical to the profane. In tree pose, otherwise known as Virkasana, our yoga teacher says to stand on one leg for balance. Move the sole of the other foot into the inner thigh of the standing leg. Once you found your balance, put your hands in prayer in front of your chest and then raise them over your head, arms to ears. Stand tall, steady. Grow, she says, root yourself to the ground, breathe. After the wind tore up our backyard, and in the morning pollen soaked the grass, forsythia burst forth, loose twigs hurled into the gutters, arthritic branches in the drive. Is it the chaos of God's will, we wondered? One had no faith, another fickle, one a believer, another dreamy and skittish. Miners, we collected stones, fished for worms in the ground, picked leaves, traced the veins as we tracked them in our palms, plucked poison berries, buried dead birds. We did not know of war or murder or the difference of skin. We knew only that from which we were. Pollen, like sperm to humans and animals, the male reproductive vehicle which fertilizes the egg of the female ovary of the same species, instrumental in the continued life cycle of plants and trees. It is a powdery cloud of fine yellowish grains, each tiny grain a single cell, enclosed in a protective coating. If the pollen can't move about in search of a mate, wind, bees, birds, bats, butterflies will carry pollen to its female source. What are words when they meet the action of what they attempt to modify? What is snow but series on series of crystals of ice? What is pollen but a golden granular element of microscopic grains released from the male part of a flower? What are weeds but the aftermath of seeds the wind blows into a yard and threaten to overtake? What is grass but a blade of energy in a single instance of a mass? What is breath but air taken into the lungs and expelled? In yoga class, the teacher says Yukitasana, or awkward pose, chair pose, comes from the ancient stance of two warriors in opposition. In this pose, we place our standing feet together, our chest out, and our arms stretched by our ears, and squat without losing alignment in our back. Yukitasana comes from the Sanskrit Utika, which means fierce, proud, high, haughty, superior, immense, large, difficult. It is a warrior pose. You must breathe through your struggle, she says. Set your intention, breathe. Butterflies sometimes mate as soon as the male emerges from its pupa and will help the female to shed hers, undressing her by pulling off her silk coat. Others mate when the male courts the female in the air, pins her down, and breeds her on the ground. Before she migrates, the female lays her eggs on the milkweed plant to nourish with its milk. In Baddha Konasana, also known as butterfly pose, we sit up straight and put the soles of our 2 feet together so that our knees fall outward like the wings of a butterfly. The yoga teacher says it's a grounding pose. Close your eyes, she says. I am, I am. It is a chant for connection from the personal self, I am, to the infinite universal. I am, she says. I am, we silently repeat, our hands folded in prayer. I am. Beneath the soil is an underground system of roots, a connected family that shares their nutrients. If a tree or plant is under duress, sometimes the giving of nutrients from one to the other will bring a sick tree back to life. Further, a tree isolated from other trees is likely to live a shorter life. The monarchs are born. They are smaller this year. One is feasting on the zinnias in my pot on the deck. its wings open and close as if sucking in the nectar. We chased monarchs when my son was small. Once we caught one, we watched it flutter in the net, so fragile we could have crushed it, and flung it back into the wild, too beautiful with its tapestry of black and orange, regal, named after the Prince of Orange in Holland, to prison in a jar. Truth is destiny, says a voice from Battlefield, Peter Brooks's version of the Mahabharata, the epic poem of India we saw one night at BAM. War, like every war for power, destroys a family. The Kauravas on one side are decimated by their cousins, the Pandavas, and the 100 sons of the blind king strewn across the battlefield. Everything is inside the Mahabharata, all action controlled by destiny. And if it isn't there, says the Creator, it doesn't exist. Once, due to disease, we had to cut down a tree to its stump, hoping the roots might sprout again around the edges and regenerate. To determine her age, still a baby in terms of the life of trees, we counted the number of circles inside the bark's circumference. 21 rings circled her breath. 21 years bequeathed to the warmth of the sun, pull from the moon, water from the earth. 7,665 days, 183,960 hours, 1,600 minutes in which her long arms locked in the roots and branches of sister trees, shared their sugars, were awash in daylight, and if a storm suffered shaking in brutal darkness. Here I'm going to read two versions of the word reigning, one being the reign and the other reigning being a monarchy. Reigning, 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 reigning and reigning, reigning and reigning, reigning and reigning and reigning. The mind turns inward after being bound by the actions of the body. If there's something you can't let go of, breathe into it, the teacher says. During Savasana, Sanskrit for corpse or final resting pose, outside under the tent, flies buzzing, flat on our backs, arms and legs splayed open on our mats, as if we're children playing dead, and she, like a victorious warrior on a battlefield, says to surrender all effort as she walks through the rows. Destiny is bigger than any one of us, says the epic's creator. Individual lives do not matter. Valor will be desecrated, and in the battlefield of time, regardless, like trees, we all eventually fall. And relief flooded my fears, breathed, and brought me back to earth. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
I think we do need to breathe for a minute and just take in the beauty of Jill's work. Can you hear me? Thank you. Yeah. Will you breathe with me for a minute? A couple of breaths just to take in the poems. Sometimes with hearing poems, sister poets, you need to wait a moment to honor the work. Thank you, Jill. Thank you all for coming out. It is the first for me, too. Strange. And thank you to Guildhall and all the staff for being so welcoming and gracious and helpful. Thank you to Bookhampton.
Yes, thank you.
I'm going to read a few poems. The Lost Brother Alphabet is the title of the book, and it's also a sequence of poems within the book, elegiac poems for my brother, who took his life in 2011. And each one of the poems in the sequence is titled with a letter. And in the poem, you'll hear, I hope, sounds, repetitions and sounds of that letter. So I'm going to weave them through a little bit and read a few others as well. Horses still. One chilly April midnight when I was 10, the farmer in my life woke me in flannel nightgown and sleepy feet to pad down the dirt trail, white mare heaving on yellow straw. This is the story I keep telling. We all have one. Who was birthed that night became my hooved companion, quieted my train track heart torn between locations and parents, Jewish girl with a braid and Arab horse with high flicking tail weren't meant to be together or leap over fences, so we flew into our own animal grammar until I left to be grown. Equine murmur not tough enough to prove my worth. Today I reject harness, steel bit, the gate opens. This is B of the Lost Brother Alphabet. You loved that smothered, buttered bread. We called you Bimbo after the song. Blonde then, blue-eyed boy. Bimbo, Bimbo, where you gonna go, yo? Bimbo, Bimbo, does your mommy know that you're going down the road to see a little girl, yo? Each year your bad valve kidney probed, poked, tube through penis, hospital after hospital bleeding, parents combing the country for the best. In Boston Children's, surgery at 15, long, handsome hair, flirting with nurses. There was a girl, her whole body burned, sitting gauzed in a chair. Did it break you? F. There's an epigraph from Anna Karenina, Leo Tolstoy. All happy families are alike. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. Tolstoy got it wrong. What is a happy family? Today's lesson, F. Brother as friend, fiend. You forgot to leave my dream, just walked in last night like a cowboy, then fled again. I fortify, fortify. Oh. Or oxy, or overdose before the gun. No one told us, we could have guessed. Pain makes a person old. Or, oh no, O's in moon, the moan of distance looms, voice turns to ice. Oh moon, oh haunt of loon, oh round, you gave up on my brother, I did. And why? This letter wants to say yes, but like a rank horse, it yanks to no. Year of no beginning, this lost letter only a V on a tree trunk. Yen for pickles in front of TV watching I Spy. Yell as your knee snaps out of itself on the field, me on your shoulders to touchdown. Yelp for your dog Puff, named after the song in the faraway land, Hanali. It's not about the yaw or the Y chromosome. What yeast, what bread, what stirring? Yes, I give this letter to you who wanted to write. All yours. Since we're talking about love, this is for John. I will tell you that I used to lie down in a grassy field curved into the belly of a bay horse with one white star on her broad face, calmed by warm breath sifting through whiskers onto my arm. And about love, I can share with you that as a kid I had two friends no one else could see named Wingding and Honey, who traveled frequently, and if a person inquired about their whereabouts, I might have said, oh, it's a big week for them, off to Switzerland and Japan for work, but still scolded the waiter in the coffee shop, Candy Kitchen, for failing to bring their fries. Speaking of love, I should let you know that I found some silvery cut hairs by the sink yesterday, and ordinarily I'd rant about the hairs. Who would leave cut hairs by the sink? But this time swooped those silvery hairs and blew them into the air like eyelashes for luck, with the same lips that have been kissing the man who left the hairs for 44 years, if you can believe it. And love being our subject, I must reveal that despite the shit evil news of the conqueror, this very day I woke to a poem full of kisses and licks, all of which is to say, poems of love, my friends, fan open like peacock feathers and light the field of my morning. Return. The animals camp out in the farm of my body, a field of muscle, fat, and bone, sea of nerves. They mend my vessels, sew back my arteries, sing my stutter, gallop my missteps. First a horse, then the others claim their places. Even snakes and insects swivel and swarm. I thought the rupture within was all a human thing. The mother, the father, the lost girl. Now I understand the earth itself is calling, and the animals, buried, scattered, those who rise, snort, bellow, murmur, hiss, their hooves, wings, fins, and tentacles seed the soil, repair the soul. More S. So there's another S, this is more S. Still for you I crave some sweet, not shifty, not shut, not shafted or shafting. That sea we soaked. I want to suck out your shame, the sour, the scary, the souled self. Salute your soul. I am your sister. Here is my salt. Too late, this salve. And the last poem I'll read is called To Kneel. Oh, I have the wrong page. There it is. And after we read, we're going to talk a little. The black men who make wages from the brutal banging of the skull, pounding of the knees, arms reaching like branches in the long arc of a pass, now kneel. The muscles of their soles, the soles of their cleats, stretch of their thighs speak. Fans and refs yell, commentators jabber, and behold, one knee, hand to ground, they kneel. The weight of their built-up bodies pulled earthward, as if called by those from before to kneel now, refusing to salute this country's killing field. Those with the heart to be the lonely first, their knees sing. Jobs at stake, they kneel for the inheritors, for the future dignity of bodies to choose to stand or touch down. And the joining, too, some, then flocks, arms threaded, waving flags of jerseyed bodies, an anthem for the uncountable to be counted. And to those who drop to the knee, only in the recesses of a locked back room, or those who switch and bait in the light amid the throngs, or those who hide behind their whiteness. Who will be there to kneel for you when such a time comes, as it will come? What will you say when your children or your grandchildren, their friends or lovers ask, what parts of your body touched the ground in the moment of loyalty or the moment of betrayal? What would I? Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. That was gorgeous. So I wanted to, I think what I mentioned earlier that Kathy and I had talked about reading together, doing some event together for a long time. And the reason for that had to do with the fact that both of us had experienced a very devastating tragedy in our lives. Me, the suicide of my sister, and Kathy, your brother. And when you told me about your book, The Lost Brother Alphabet, or The Lost, yes, I was just so intrigued by that title. And I wanted to ask you, how did you come up with the idea of the lost alphabet and of sort of finding certain letters to begin a poem?
Thanks for the question. Can you hear me? Yeah? Thanks for the question, Jill. I didn't. It came up with me. I didn't expect it. In the spring of 2012, I was at the Hedgebrook Women Writers Retreat with my sister, and my proposal, how I was accepted, was to work on a political memoir. And The Lost Brother Alphabet just wrote itself. I mean, the first draft. Of course, it got rewritten many times. But the alphabet came to me. I kept thinking of poets I admired who talked about using form to deal with really hard subjects, and that form was a way in. And there wasn't a form, like a heroic crown of sonnets or something that came to me, but I found that the alphabet, first of all, it's so elemental, and it has this scaffolding or childlike quality also. It just provided me with the scaffolding, and I didn't intend to write the poems at all. But that's how it happened. And this book was 2 books at some point, or 3. But let me ask you the same thing. This book, I know that both of us have worked on these books for quite some years, and it's so fluid, it's so beautifully threaded, and the lyrical flow of it is extraordinary. How did it come to be, or can you say something about your process?
Yeah, I think like you, Kathy, it sort of took on its own life. I began Asylum, it was in 2016, and actually I set out to really try to capture how I came to poetry. That's how Asylum began in my own mind. After so many years, I was just completely interested in looking back and thinking about that journey as a young girl or a young woman in English major. How did I come to have this life as a poet? But then we entered into a new administration, and I felt that there was so much despair around me, around us, and the, racial violence and terrorism and, the unleashing of anti-Semitism, which really frightened me. And so as I was working on this book, I just felt that these voices began to enter into my consciousness, and I really feared for the, how we're able to sustain ourselves in the midst of so much uncertainty and so much grief. And now with the pandemic, which kind of entered into the very last poem that I wrote in this book. But I don't know, I just decided to go with this. There are 4 or 5 threads to the book. You heard me speak about the yoga teacher and breathing. And then there's a thread, a very personal thread about grieving for the loss of my sister and the ideas of survival and extinction I was looking at through the natural world. And then there's a thread about, more sort of historical aspects. But I just gave myself permission to take some risks and to create this longer work. And normally my poems are my last book, The Players, was just a collection of poems. So this was really a new thing for me.
So this isn't a question on our list. Can I have permission to
sure.
ask it anyway? Because when we talked a few days ago, we touched on this question of giving ourselves permission. And I know with my students at NYU, this comes up a lot, and they're very powerful, they're very political artists. However, this conflict about permission, I wonder if you could say a little bit more about what it means, and particularly at a certain stage of life, to give oneself permission to really go, as some of my teachers said, to go into the hardest places with your work, and also to go into the place that's calling you, even if some of your friends or colleagues say, well, maybe you should try it this way or that way.
What struck me is something that you said, Kathy, when you mentioned that when you went to Hedgebrook to work on your memoir, you ended up writing these poems of grief and recalling childhood, and I think that's in a way what happened to me, that I didn't really know what I was undertaking, but I just followed certain threads that were in my mind, and the idea that I read recently with the poet Gail Mazur, and she said that, two things: that grief never ends, being one, and that you learn nothing from grief. And I thought about that, and I actually disagree with her. I think that you learn, even though I am an admirer of hers and her poetry, I feel that it continues to evolve, and I just gave myself permission to allow that evolution to return to childhood and also adulthood, and see where it took me.
Beautiful.
What about you? How did you feel about, writing about, in Kathy's beautiful book, you also write about the grief of losing your father. And of course, your brother is such a, he comes through as such a beautiful presence in the poems. And so how was that for you, and how was it knowing that, I know you have other family members who are still with us?
Really scary. Really scary. Yeah. I didn't have a choice, I don't think, as an artist. We all do differently, right? But I don't think I had a choice, but it's all scary. I mean, if you're going for a truth and you're using your craft that way, I think it's all scary. Whatever you're writing about is kind of scary. But this one was really scary. And I several times said I shouldn't be doing this, I shouldn't be writing these poems, I shouldn't be publishing them. But and one of our questions for each other was the relationship between personal, intimate love and grief and conflict and understanding, and that in community and in the world. And how do we see that? And I am strange, but I've never seen them differently. I've never seen them as separate. I find them all in the same body and in the same world, even though you may focus. I think also the denial, the lack of acknowledgement. I don't agree with her either, even though I'm an admirer, and it's great to disagree because you learn a lot. But I think the denial, the lack of acknowledgement about grief causes illness. That's my experience. Not that we're all going to move through it the same way. But yeah, I just think it's very scary, and it's also what I had to do. So I hope it's okay for those for whom it's hard.
Well, I think what happens is that, as a poet, you hope that these figures that you're writing about become more universal, rather that they take on a kind of mythic quality, so that you're not just writing about your brother, but you're writing about a communal response to the loss of someone through using, storytelling and metaphors and snippets of memory. And I always think, people tend to ask poets, was that really true what happened in that poem? And, the truth is that poets take liberties, and, we try to allow the poem to take on its own life, so that really, nothing, in a sense, reality is always shifting. So that's how I think about my work in a way, as a kind of myth making, because yes, there are elements that are very personal, but I'm also playing with ideas.
Yeah, and I think always, as with the great novels, the very specific, whose ever life, it's somebody's life or some amalgam of lives. That's what you remember. Right. The biscuit or the pouring of the coffee, or those are the things you remember and identify with when you do. So everybody has lost somebody. Everybody. There are so many things that connect us in ways that we do or don't pay attention to necessarily. So I think that it's a question of how it's done and what connects with a particular reader, listener.
So. Kathy and I wanted to end by each reading a poem from, for instance, I'm going to read a poem of Kathy's, and Kathy's going to read a poem of mine, and then we thought we would open it for a few questions. So shall we embark?
Let's do it.
Okay.
You want me to go first?
Sure.
Okay.
While I find, okay.
I'm going to read from Asylum by Bialosky, number 30 in the sequence. We kept our heads down. We were entranced, focused. Sometimes we could not see anything before us. That's what it required. One year I had forgotten the first leaves of spring. I had forgotten all the years of toil. I looked up and trees had flowered. All it took was waiting out the bleak winter, the hemisphere of darkness. The color was lime green. I wanted to tell her, this is what it's like.
Thank you. So sweet. And I'm going to read I Stop for Beauty from the Lost Brother Alphabet. I told Kathy that this title reminded me of Emily Dickinson. I Stop for Beauty. At Grace Church, drawn to go in, more to stand in, sapphire dusk of worship, familiar corner of my city, I stay outside, stare at the stone structure, angled as a Giacometti face. What is real? Whose God is in there, blue as the day life started? On the sidewalk, I'm transfixed. The cobalt of memory cloaks me. Fatherless mother of grown women, aging daughter, the wings of me flying and staying, always both, as the hem of day meets night, and I'm learning to breathe, cement under my feet. This is where my father stood, where he stooped down to hold my daughter's fine-boned hand.
Thank you.
I love that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jill. We're going to open for a few questions before the dark comes over us. And I also just wanted to mention, because it does take a village to bring out a book of poems, that, and because this is sister poets, that my dear friend Candace Hill, who's sitting right over here in the blue chair, has a book coming out. It's out, right? Are you holding it at home? No, not quite. And I think many of you will be hearing about it soon, and she'll be doing things with the book. It's called Muse Seal, and I'm really excited to read it and maybe to introduce you at a reading or something. Thank you.
Congratulations.
It's so good to see you. Any questions for us? Comments, questions? Yeah.
Between love
And grief.
Do you want to?
Go ahead.
The question I believe is what is the connection between love and grief? I suppose that there must be love in order to feel grief. That's my response.
Yeah, I like that. I think they're inseparable. For me, they're inseparable, like birth and death. You know, I don't see them as separate at all. Mm-hmm. Even though one, yeah, that's all I'll say. Mm-hmm. What about you? Can you speak louder?
Oh, I see it. Okay.
I'm not sure about that, but I'll think about it.
Mm-hmm. Of course, one could be grieving for love.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. But I sort of feel like most poems are love poems, but I don't know. That's a very personal take, you know. Anyone else? Yeah.
I just want to first say thank you because, can you hear me with the mask?
Yeah, just
No, I wanted
belt it out.
thank you because it's so important, as you said, especially we all have lost someone and some losses are greater than others. And
you.
It's comforting,
Hmm.
right, for other people to know you're giving a voice to other people. Universal emotions and experiences. But that being said, I'm just curious, Kathy, you said you were so scared. You were so scared. What were you so scared of specifically? Were you afraid of other people's reactions, or what were you so afraid of?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for what you said. That feels good to hear that. I think two things, at least. One is I just wanted to make sure the rest of my family was okay, and my brother's family, with me writing, putting these poems into the world. And I know it's my job to do this, but I wanted to make sure. And people have different ways. And the other is I just think it's, I'm scared when I write something very controversial, which I do regularly, or seemingly controversial. It may not be to me. So I think one is quite naked when one writes this kind of work, and so it's just but fear is okay, you know. I mean, if I wasn't afraid, maybe I'd say I wasn't really doing the work. But I appreciate the question. Does that answer it? Yes.
Hi, thank you for tonight's program. I agree with you that grief does teach us things in this world, and I'm wondering, for both of you, what was the most important or most enlightening thing that grief has taught you in your lives?
That's a very difficult question. What has grief taught me, taught us? I don't know. I really don't know how to respond to it, because I think that grief becomes so much a part of who you are. If you've had losses that are very significant, which I've had in my life. I was actually born into loss because my father died when I was 2. So loss has just been part of who I am in a way, and grief, having witnessed grief through my mother's losses as well, I think grief just becomes part of who you are, and those that you've lost, evolve. I think for me, the memories evolve. My relationship with those I've lost continue to evolve.
For me, I wouldn't want to try to say one thing, but I also want to say that it's a big word, grief, and one grieves for a village or for a country at the same time as grieving for a particular loved one. At least that's my experience of. So to me, it's about connectedness and continuity and honoring life, but also having a sense of who came before and what may come, and being really paying attention to life.
I would also say that grief, the word grief, I think people associate it with the immediacy after the loss, that the acute sense of grief. So for me, I have trouble almost with the word, because it really is never ending. You just learn how to live with grief. But the word is just, it's not a good word, in my view.
Right. It's vague. It's abstract.
It's become too familiar, in a sense. So that's why good poems, don't use the word grief. You hope that the poem shows the experience somehow.
Yeah, because it's always both, I
Yeah.
think. You know,
But we don't have another word for it that mourning. I don't know.
but I think it comes alive. These abstract, big experiences, feelings, through the specifics, you know, and through hearing and understanding the experiences of others, and what's different and what the threads are. And I did want to dedicate my reading tonight to the people of Beirut, speaking of grief, and to just, you know, keep present with people who are close and people who are not physically or geographically or even culturally close at times. Any more comments, questions? Because I think we're right at the
Darkness
sundown.
is falling, right?
I love these lights. Anything else? Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jill.
Thank you, Kathy. Yeah. Yeah.